So my name is Shelly O'Donovan. I teach at the Wharton School. I also own a small corporate training company, and I've spent most of my career touching healthcare. And so I'm very pleased today to moderate this panel on healthcare venture capital. And with that, I'm actually going to ask my guests to introduce themselves. And I think we'll go online first with you, Doug, and ask you to make the first introduction here.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to not see everybody, but also at least to be able to hear and engage all the comments. I'm Doug Sylvester. I'm one of the general partners at a relatively new health tech venture capital company called Xcellerant Ventures here in Scottsdale, Arizona. My partners are John Schufeld, who is the founder of NextCare Urgent Care, and me, MD, he's a doctor and a lawyer. Our other partner is Chris Yu, who is a PhD from some school in Connecticut called Yale. I don't know. By training, I'm an attorney, so it was great to hear that last panel. I'm also a law professor at Arizona State University, and I was the dean of the law school for 11 years before joining Xcellerant 3 years ago. So it's been a really interesting experience for me. I'm very eager to hear what everybody else says here on the panel. And Marty, as always, thanks for having me here.
Great, excellent. So Lauren, we'll start with you and work our way down.
Hi, my name is Lauren Chung. My background's healthcare research scientist, and I was also a public equities investor for 10 years, managing a hedge fund that transacted with Perella Weinberg Partners. And in the last 10 years, I've been a venture partner, investor in early stage companies, and also advisor for emerging companies. I serve as a business advisor for Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation and Rockefeller University. And so I have been looking at a lot of investment opportunities for investment purposes, but this company came up as an investment opportunity and it was very interesting. And I recently joined as a CFO. The company is called Laxo Medical. And when it's time, I'll talk more about it.
I'm Dianna Raedle. I am the CEO and founder of a group called Deer Isle Group. And we basically have a fintech solution for very efficiently raising capital for all sorts of deals, including healthcare venture capital. We also have outsourced CFO services, which we're currently working actually with a battery recycling company. And we can talk about the various stages and what's required in today's market environments in terms of how one thinks about the capital markets and growing a healthcare company.
I'm Jim Kelleher. I'm honored and pleased to be here and grateful to Marty Sakata for inviting me. I'm a psychiatrist and I'm an investment banker. In terms of the work I'm here to talk about today is venture capital. So I work for the broker-dealer Young America Capital in Mamaroneck, New York. I also work for the financial advisory firm New York Bay Capital here in Manhattan. They do cross-border financing. I'm passionate about advancing healthcare, and as a practitioner and as a researcher, that's been part of my goal. In terms of finding the funding for that, that's an extra piece of the puzzle, which they don't teach you in medical school, and the business people don't get taught about the science so much. So I'm trying to help to bridge that gap, and we've had some success, which is wonderful. In terms of my previous research, I got a couple of awards for demonstrating a mechanism of action for antipsychotic drugs, that's now used in the blockbuster drug Vraylar. And then subsequent to that, I've been on the venture advisory board for Yale University Connecticut Innovative Therapeutics Program and some other academic institutions that I've worked with as well. So I'm happy to see if I can help with the knowledge base about this topic.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Well, we've heard a lot over the last couple of days really about healthcare woven in here. And so I wanted to ask the panel, where are you seeing the most interest in healthcare from venture capitalists in terms of innovation and just new technologies emerging?
Yeah, so I think healthcare, like everything else, is tough. But there are a couple of areas where, one can distinguish oneself, I think. If you look at the biotech indexes, it's obviously had a huge retraction. And I think a lot of people are thinking that that is starting to look attractive in terms of, how does one think about biotech and the future of biotech, and especially with all the technology that everybody's been talking about. But I would also talk about stage. So, I think at this point, Series B is the hardest stage to get funded. So Series A, where you're sort of selling an idea and, it's very exciting and people can get interested in it, is, that's something that people can still get behind. And Series C and Series D, where your business model has been proven out and you can actually show results and people can sort of project forward, that also is, seeing movement. And what seems to be the most difficult is Series B, where the team has to transition from we're very excited scientists to really demonstrating their business model. And that's where we caution people, is to really seriously think about that. And on the due diligence side, it's also where people need to think about, like, how are these people showing, how is this team showing their business model and how they can actually generate revenues.
Excellent. Anybody else want to jump in on that question?
Well, just in the world of mental health alone, I think digital applications have really, they're a very hot area right now for investment of venture capital. Obviously, the artificial intelligence world is starting to intersect with that increasingly as well, which opens a lot of new opportunities. And I think that the Affordable Care Act has afforded more business opportunities in this area, along with mental health parity. So in terms of my home area and mental health, it's the digital world that's really leading the charge, notwithstanding the fact that we have a lot of biologically based therapies, which are very promising as well.
I'd also add women's health. So to Jim's comment about digital health, there's a lot of interest in femtech. Supposed to be 20 billion plus in 2030. And as I get older, I also notice a lot more about the unmet medical need in healthcare for women. And I recently joined an advisory board called Onc Impact Ventures. And its full mission is to fund female entrepreneurs. And so, not all female entrepreneurs are doing women's health company entrepreneurship, of course, but I think there has to be more investment going into not only female entrepreneurs, but also women's health.
If I could
Excellent.
just
What about
join
you,
in.
Doug?
Yeah, just joining in online. I as always, the panel has nailed just about all the right issues. What we've seen is an incredible amount of ferment. I mean, we're at the end of our investment period, getting pretty close. We even made 12 different investments. I think the area that we've been really almost most disappointed, but where we've also spent the most time, it really is in the mental health space. We've really wanted to get into that area, and there's an incredible number of companies, but it's just very difficult to find the ones that are really starting to get traction. And part of what we've really seen to the issue of funding, as these companies are now in their second year in our portfolio and they're moving towards a Series B, great point, is this sort of threat of the larger players really moving into play. So we're seeing is the large players are not really looking to strategically buy. They're starting to really roll out their own ideas. And so this competition, I think, is really holding back capital from flowing into startups and entrepreneurs. And that's been a really interesting experience for us over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
You asked Jim if that was in therapeutics or in practices. What was the investment?
Yeah. So Jim, did you hear that question? Or Doug, sorry. Doug, was that in therapeutics or was that in other technologies?
Yeah, thank you for repeating. I can't hear the question, so that's really
Okay.
helpful. No, so not therapeutics. It's not an area that we move in. We do see therapeutics is actually an incredibly robust area that capital is flowing into even now, maybe again, because there's been such a difficult correction. We're largely in the digital delivery side or medical device side. And so in the mental health space is what I was talking about. And in some of the medical device spaces as well. What we're seeing is, some of the really large players, Athena and Epic, they're sort of suddenly announcing that they're going to move into these fields, putting out their own solutions, not necessarily buying, strategics. And so what we're seeing is it sort of freezes capital. People want to see how things shake out, which means these startups are really struggling, I think, to find that Series B and Series C round where they really need investment to come in. It's not where we would be investing. We are sort of seed plus and Series A. So watching these companies and saying, we're there to help, but you've got to find some other larger capital providers. And it seems to be really slow to move into those kinds of startups. Yeah. So not in the therapeutics. That's not an area we're involved.
Okay. Go ahead.
I would just add one more thing, which was the previous panels talking about impact investing and how family offices are now potentially, raising funds that focus on impact. I'm hoping that kind of fundraise or charitable organizations are raising funds. I'm hoping that can bridge this gap, right? Because there's a very large risk when somebody doesn't have a business model yet that it may or may not work, right? And there's also the risk of competition, right? Everybody thinks that their idea is the only one, and then there's like 10 other people doing the same thing. So I was very heartened to hear, I guess, about all the efforts in terms of putting together charitable funds and family office funds that focus on this specific area, it sounds like.
And can you all speak a little bit to how you actually would evaluate that impact or potential impact that some of these technologies or startups are going to have? Is there particular things you look for, a process you go through?
Well, just in terms of the digital health space, for example, for mental health, it's a crowded space, as we've heard, and it's also the industry's changing, it's developing, it's morphing. I think we're seeing more focus on niche markets, for example, women's health, women's behavioral health, which seems to be positive because it's also more specified in terms of the providers and the services and so forth. And also it can be provide more opportunities for individual companies to distinguish themselves because they're not competing big and broad against everybody. And the movement in terms of the total addressable market, it's very, very large for digital behavioral health, and you have room to work within that space. There's needs that haven't been met. There's states that have very limited number of actual providers in them. So it's a market that is still unfolding. And then when you consider that there's an increased push, courtesy of the way healthcare is going, some of it has to do with the federal government's initiatives towards delivering more primary care services and bundling in mental health services, which is a positive step healthcare-wise. You have more opportunity to work in this niche space as well.
Yeah, so you bring up a good point. So you talk a little bit about the trends, the digital trends, but in the mental health space. But what other trends are you all seeing in this venture capital space for healthcare, and what should family offices be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, I think the very big one is AI, right? Like, how do you apply AI and make things more efficient? How do you apply AI to, coming up with solutions? Mental health, you have these, sort of online things where you can talk to people and, get help, or not talk to people, talk to an AI machine to get help. So I think AI is one really big one. And then another one would be robotics, actually. I mean, there's a lot going on in robotics in terms of some of the delivery of if you're in a rural area, you can't get medicine, so you got to have things delivered to you somehow. Surgery. There's multiple ways that technology is infiltrating this area, I think. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd add to something close to what Dianna was saying about platform technologies that have multiple use cases, multiple product that come out of that platform, or multiple contracts that could be applicable. I think those companies are interesting. Also, regulatory pathway could be very difficult for certain indications. It's like, going back to women's health, if you're talking about menopause, how do you measure that? And because that also ties into, prevention of aging. Separating out prevention of aging for reproductive health versus overall health. And so there are a lot of regulatory pathways that the companies have to navigate. So, I would say cancer is not going to go away. I mean, I think there's still a lot of unmet medical need in cancer. And, there was also, Stand Up to Cancer that was discussed yesterday. Partnering with organizations like that, that I think as that partnerships grow, I think there'll be a lot more opportunities to help, patients in unmet medical need.
Yeah, Doug, I don't want to forget you there. Anything to add on this?
I know it's sort of interesting. The FDA came out yesterday with a dense breast tissue announcement that everybody who has to immediately be told that they have dense breast tissue. We will be announcing an investment in a company that's using AI and imaging to try and address those kinds of questions. So we are seeing AI and imaging is a very, very robust area. AI as a pre-diagnostic and guider. We have another company called TrueLight already in our portfolio that uses AI to inform doctors when they're about to order tests or provide therapeutic treatment to a patient, that they get nudged towards thinking about ethnicity and socioeconomic status. And so are there things you didn't learn in medical school that might have changed and that you might need to think about? So we're seeing a lot of AI uses. In terms of trends, the biggest problem unequivocally, I'm also the founder of a medical device company called ScriptGuard. And to try and go out and find funding has been, I think, the greatest problem. There's just this real hesitation right now that there's going to be some kind of either regulatory shakeout or larger shakeout in the market itself. And so markets are a little frozen at the moment, especially, to a great point earlier, again, as companies are moving up the ladder, they're really struggling to find those larger paychecks without really clear pathways to either acquisition or some kind of larger business model success. So it's a tough market. I think that's probably the single biggest platform technology problem we have, is finding the funding as these companies move forward. They're successful, but they're just really struggling to find that next round.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dianna.
Yeah, you asked about due diligence before, and related to this, building out the business model and due diligence, where I would say one of the biggest things is some indication of pipeline, in terms of who has, like, what commercial entity has validated your solution, and how many of them have done it, what's their name recognition, are they big enough to actually generate revenues for you? So it's that pipeline process, I think, that people should do due diligence. It's really important for the company to be able to articulate, to actually try to get somebody to pay attention to that next level of funding.
And you've seen that shift, so it's getting stronger. They need more clinical evidence, more research, more ability to be able to communicate that.
Yeah, and I think also, it's this is where we're talking about, to Doug's point, the transition from A to B to C. Like A, you can have the clinical proof and whatnot, but for B, you need to have found somebody who says, yes, that clinical proof is actually interesting to me. They don't have to have written you a check, but they need to have sort of indicated, best is in some kind of writing, like, if you get this through this, we're a potential buyer.
Right, absolutely. And so tell me a little bit too more about that process, and just in terms of a family office, what kind of tips might you have for evaluating those types of things?
Just to previous points about, difference between, early stage and what you would look out for later stage. For early stage, it's more, the unmet medical need, the market opportunity, the team, and that there'll be more skewed, diligence around that. And then for later stage, I'm always looking at commercialization, revenue growth, sort of execution, capabilities, and then also regulatory milestones or specific milestones related to execution.
Yeah.
I think I second your point. I think one of the challenges in healthcare specifically is, and I guess we're talking about a very big area because we might be talking about things that range all the way from therapeutics that are regulated by the FDA to something that's a little bit maybe more practice of medicine, delivery of care. But at the same time, you're going to intersect with regulations almost everywhere you go, and that's quite a significant impediment to dreamers who want to just deliver their care. But if you can assemble the team as you go and perfect it as you go towards more of that execution of the model, that's going to be the key to success as well, obviously.
I
And,
could
and
just-
specifically for, oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, sorry.
No,
Go ahead, Doug.
it's hard to do here at distance, but all I was going to say is, again, I think with the family offices that we've worked with, and we've obviously talked to a number, it's the upside is still there, right? We're in venture for a particular reason, but it is a longer road and it's a little more capital intensive than SaaS or other areas that have gotten a lot of people spoiled, or even, quite frankly, real estate, where you're just sort of looking at sort of market trends and seeing how things can flow. There's a lot of taking that step back, having to sort of reassess some of the work that you've already done, put some capital back into the company, and then go back out. People don't like that in startups and venture, but in the health space, it's absolutely part of the process. So the main thing I would say to family offices is the upside is massive. The TAM is spectacular for some of these companies, but it is a longer road, and you're going to see more setbacks as you move along. You know, year over year, 100%, growth in revenue and doubling of customers is just not the pathway that happens in health tech. And that's just that it's a difficult road for people because they're looking quite often for 12-month, 18-month success that they can immediately report back. And this is a little bit longer period of time. Worth it, but a little bit more patience is necessary. Sorry.
Yeah, and I would add for the family office, if you're making this investment for return, if you're making this for impact, then, this doesn't really apply. But try to take the emotion out, right? Because people show up with they're like, oh my God, they're going to save this group of people. And you're like, okay, I want to save that group of people. But it's like, how do you put in the advisors that can help you assess, is this really unique? Is this really going to be transforming? Does this really help, right? Because if it's pre-revenue generation, there's lots of questions that have to be answered before they're going to get to revenue generation, as everybody's saying, regulatory, as well as maybe more rounds of capital that might, cram you down. So you really have to, I think, either have that internal capability or think about who are the best advisors, the third-party advisors who can help me.
And I would ask you the founder story. I assume that's really essential, but sometimes that can muddy that water of being not emotionally connecting to that. So any thoughts on that? Just some interesting founder stories that you've heard, successes or.
I mean, honestly, recently I've heard of founders floundering. One company has a vaccine for Lyme disease, and they're actually, starting to generate revenues. They have some, major partnerships with lawn care companies because it's a vaccine that actually gets given to mice because mice are big carriers of Lyme. But they hadn't really been focusing on cultivating their broader investor network than their narrow investor network. They needed a little bit more capital to bridge that. Actually, this has a good ending, but the existing investors were going to cram them down by 90%. And then to what some people were talking about strategics, they found an international investor who wants to come to the US, who's out of Mexico, who wants to have a presence here and is interested in this kind of solution. And so this international investor might fund them with like $50 million and not cram them down. So that's the swing of the founders life, I think.
Yeah, I could talk about Laxo Medical because predominantly this company has been funded by high net worth individuals and family offices. And as family offices have become more active in healthcare ventures and because of this, lack of funding or challenges in funding, I think family offices are looked to more for these healthcare, startup companies. And this Laxo Medical is a 3D printing company that can manufacture drugs efficiently, oral drugs in particular. And they pass through Series B, and I'm joining at Series C. And so I could understand sort of the challenges that you have because the lower level employees are at market and the founders are already at a different pay grade, right? Because they have founder shares. So all the people that are in the middle, that are senior level people that, have to take risk. And so you go through a lot of challenges as you raise money, but, this company was able to now have 4 contracts, it's revenue generating and is looking to IPO in 12 to 18 months. So, there are a lot of interesting opportunities out there. So, I would say, keep being on the lookout.
So I was curious if we had any questions from the audience.
So, Doug Sylvester, I'm a big fan of Xcellerant. You backed CRISPR.
I'm going to have to repeat it. So yeah. He can't hear you. I'll just repeat it.
There's no microphones in the ceiling. So you have to say it and she's going to repeat.
Yeah, I'll repeat it for you.
Sorry.
No?
Say them there.
Stay where I am.
Yes.
So Doug, how did you decide to invest in a biotools company like CRISPR QC with just 10 revenue? And how far, I mean, they've been marvelous things with your patch. So thank you. Are you looking at other biotools companies? Is there a sector for Xcellerant Ventures? Or is it just a one-off?
So the question was around the biotools and if you have, can you hear me?
Sorry, this is
Yeah,
the exact moment, of course, as somebody knocked on my door and my dog's going crazy.
Oh,
So
no.
of course, this is how it happens. But if you could repeat the question, I can hear you, and then hopefully he shuts up, and then I can answer. Man, I'm sorry about this.
Yeah, so you were talking about the biotools and how you disappeared for a second. You were talking about the biotools and how, as a sector,
So CRISPR
it's going to
QC
speed up cures. How did you decide to get into that sector?
CRISPR QC is the company I think we're talking about. This is crazy. Somebody literally just knocked on my door, and I'm working from home here today. I have a 16-year-old daughter in school. All right, really quickly, one of the reasons is we love the CRISPR space, right? So Chris, one of my partners, knows the space extraordinarily well. Normally, to be in a space like CRISPR, you're having to put in a tremendous amount of money at a very, very high risk model. We were looking from the very outset, a little bit like we do in a number of the different sectors, for more of the shovels and picks sort of area. Who's going to support all of the different companies that are going to use that technology? And CRISPR QC was one of the companies we looked at a bunch. We found very successful. It actually goes to a problem as well, which is I'm going to have to kill my dog. But the other problem is that I won't. I love him. But the other problem is we were talking about underrepresented minorities and female-founded companies. The people who can find the capital tend to be people that have done this before, and they look a little bit more like me. And so, to be honest, one of the things that we liked about CRISPR QC is they had an experienced founder base that we felt would be able to find that next round of financing when other founders that we've supported are struggling a little bit more, requires a lot more work on our part to call up different people to get them involved. But for us, it's always been, we're not looking to buy into therapeutics because the risks are so high. This is not what this fund was focused on, but the kinds of platform technologies that will support those areas are things that we're excited about. We haven't found anything in mental health, but we did find something in CRISPR. And so CRISPR QC was that particular model.
Excellent. And so you bring up a good point just about the things that you use to evaluate a scalability around a startup. And I'm curious what the other panelists, aside from maybe some of the things that Doug had referenced with that particular example, if you can give some other areas or other examples.
So you mean okay, so basically scalability is one. I think what people talked about on the previous panel, which is team, right? I mean, having the right team at the right time. And oftentimes the scientists who created all the magic may or may not be the right team to take it to the next level. As Doug said, he was impressed because he thought that the team could raise more money. right? And so it goes back to, and then the third is, really navigating honestly the production or the operations, right? Because if you have to build something, if you have to raise money to build something, you're not going to have revenues until after you built it. That's a harder story than if you are, have a SaaS model or something, right? And that's why investors are very interested in SaaS models. But as we get into changing infrastructure and changing, the way we do things, there's going to be, I think, more demand on funding, building things, and then seeing the outcomes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question on, Dianna, to you or whoever wants to apply. You brought it up a little bit on impact and then it going into commercial. If you look at something, you saw Ben Cohen from Ben & Jerry's ice cream recently, or if you look at Matt Damon getting involved in water, how that was early on, but it's become big business afterwards. And there's commercial aspects to that, whether it's technology, whether it's distribution and the like. So it's not just pure, philanthropy nowadays, but there's also commercial upside. I don't want to comment about that, but you like to make sure you comment about some of it.
Yeah, I guess my comment was related to all the various panels that have talked about impact and families. And I think historically people have thought, and charities and impact. So people have historically thought, okay, these entities separate their programs from their investing. And now it seems like they're willing to consider combining the two on the program side, right? And so I was talking to Stanford Cancer, and part of the reason that they're doing this is because as a nonprofit, you can't really fund companies. So you have to have a commercial entity to fund you have to have a commercial entity to fund companies. And there are lots of companies that are effectively nonprofits until they become profitable. So you kind of have to have, you have to have this charitable, this impact money, charitable money to actually take that risk of transitioning from a nonprofit money-losing entity into a profitable entity. And I think that that's what's kind of interesting about what's going on now with what everybody was saying.
I think Norm Friedland talked about this a little bit yesterday. He's really steeped in this kind of work, which is really powerful and important. But it's a little bit non-traditional from that vantage point because it's not just the foundations doing things that are purely charitable and they always stay in that space. One thing that we haven't touched on yet, and it seems to be fairly obvious, but it's worth mentioning, the aspect of partnerships. Partnerships are something that sometimes are more predictable and sometimes not. But if your company is going to be able to grow, you're going to be able to discover those partnerships and really create them and make it a mutually beneficial situation. And I think that can also be quite transformative in terms of scaling up a company.
Excellent. Yes, Marty.
Yeah, a lot of hospital systems and partnering large pharmaceutical companies, healthcare companies, they started accelerators and they have venture arms. Is that kind of taking a pause as a result of the downturn? Or is it more active or it's as active, or can you give any kind of a directional perspective?
I'm sure it's going to grow. It has been a growing area. In some ways, I think it's been a bit of a laggard compared with where it could be. I think, though, hospital systems and academic institutions in general have multiple priorities, and this is not necessarily seen as being something that is maybe worthy of the same kind of initial investment as some other things, very legitimately. But in the long run, it could provide tremendous returns too, and that's something that gets seen over the long haul. I think then you also have other things that come into play. For example, if you're with a nonprofit entity and then they're trying to branch into a for-profit business or they're partnering with somebody, you have to be careful not to overstep your bounds in that space. But it's really, really necessary that we can liberate the academic research so that it can find a market. And a lot of that involves for-profit entities, it seems to me.
I think hospital ventures are very challenging to get funding from. And I think it's just incentives are not really aligned. I think that's part of the reasons, because if you're looking at hospital management, they're not looking to the venture fund to fund their operations. So it's quite different. So, you know, I actually, from my experience, I haven't seen much growth in the size of the funds or active allocations, you know, staffing, you know, incentivizing to get right staff to run those funds. So you know, I have not had that much luck, but hopefully.
And about like large pharmaceutical accelerators, I mean, I'm always surprised when I hear Dragon Ball, because I got into an accelerator from J&J or something like that. I'm like, why even to work? I don't understand. What can they teach you? You
Yeah.
see those
Yeah, I
gaining
think,
in popularity?
yeah, I mean, I think the difference between the hospitals and the corporates are the corporates sort of want to buy optionality into a technology that might be leverageable later. So I think that there is a much more proactive approach from the corporates. And to the point of the hospital, you know, so then you have a purpose that is, you can assess, I think, the opportunities along the lines of what you currently do as a corporation. And there's people who can do diligence. I think for the hospitals, I think it's really hard to find staffing. You know, like how does a hospital who's saving people's lives understand a commercial, you know, opportunity?
Regardless, do any of these deals come out of accelerators?
Doug, do any of your deals come out of accelerators?
They do, but largely because Chris, my partner, has been running an accelerator himself and has been part of that community for about 20 years. So a large number of at least the deals we look at start out of the accelerator side. To the earlier question, I didn't hear the question, but I heard the answers. All I want to say, you know, the hospital, never have I found them to be a useful partner. Academics are getting a little bit better at this, but it's been a very, very difficult group. Corporate is a little bit easier on certain things, but accelerators are a great place. And honestly, angel networks have been a fantastic place to see companies that have started, gotten to a certain phase, great diligence. So that network has been really helpful from a deal flow side for us as well.
And what about tech transfers?
From
I mean, there
universities.
is a lot of interest, right, from academic institutions. I think tech transfer offices are just constipated, you know, just because there's so many, you know, academic PIs that have interesting, you know, IPs and they want to transact, but, you know, it could be that they are not ready or, you know, they have to have the internal staff to work with the PIs to make sure that they have a packageable, you know, product. And so, but then, you know, and so I would say there's a lot of interest, but, you know, it's just them being or having access to the right group.
And I'm on the Princeton Entrepreneurship Advisory Board, and so deal with the tech transfer office. And honestly, professors don't really want to be entrepreneurs generally. I
Yeah.
mean, they have
They
tenure,
just
they're
want
quite happy.
sabbaticals. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that there's definitely a cultural clash, at least from Princeton. It was a research institute and not like, you know, Stanford or Harvard, where there's all sorts of trade schools. But I think it is definitely hard to bridge that gap between the academic and the, you know, for-profit.
Yeah,
You
same
made
for
the-
MDs, you know, a lot of doctors just want to save lives and they do their job. So they have an interesting technology and they just, you know, are stuck with, you know, either university tech transfer office people to help them. And then there's just a lag because they don't want to, you know, leave their system because then they could save money and they do get some support. But then to just make that jump, somebody has to make that happen. So.
It seems that there's a wealth of knowledge and ingenuity on the academic side, as well as the hospital side. There's not a lot of capital, disposable capital to invest there on the part of the academic institution, so they do have to partner and they have to liberate that. And in addition to that, some of the academic centers have many departments, many missions. Maybe they've got a medical school and an undergraduate school and a law school and so forth. They've got a lot of masters there. If you can have a standalone medical school, my alma mater is one, and they wear this on their sleeve a little bit, and it's intriguing to consider, that can move nimbly then you might have more opportunity for the hospital and the academic institution, that's Mount Sinai, to fulfill its goal of progressing in terms of advancing therapeutics as well, because they don't have as many masters to please or as many people to answer to.
And I'm just curious, can you give us a good example of one that's worked well for them? And what's the juxtaposition, right? Just schools that are layered in bureaucracy, is it essentially, or?
I have to be fair, okay? First of all, I have the highest respect for every medical school in the United States. And I also get a little bit of an overdose of the propaganda from Sinai, trying to get me to, give them money in as an alumnus and so forth. So, okay, we'll accept all of that. But they are the largest employer in New York City right now. At least they were fairly recently, because they took over the Beth Israel system years ago. They have put a concerted effort into models of healthcare, which involve advancing healthcare as well. They're major teaching and research institution, but also in terms of Discovery Center, they created institutes of different kinds for discovery. My sense is that in the long run, they see this as being not only fulfillment of the mission, but profitable, or it's a nonprofit institution, but it'll pay back. It's not just a lost leader. They have made the point, the leadership there has made the point that they don't have to worry about they're a standalone medical school, and so they can act more nimbly. And conceptually, that makes sense to me. I hope any of these things are true in terms of the way we can move things forward, because I do see these places of academia as really bastions of ingenuity and knowledge. And if we have to fully liberate the scientists from their academic institutions to have those discoveries really hit the main street, we have another hurdle to overcome, which is what we've seen.
Okay. One more question in the back there.
You talk about the process by which these early stage companies, or whatever you call it, they're for-profit companies that need to get over a hump. So they need philanthropy. But once they get over the hump, they're for-profit companies that will ultimately have for-profit investors. How do you manage from a company perspective and even from your philanthropic perspective, how this fits together?
And let me just kind of repeat that for Doug. So talking about companies, early stages, when they have to get over the valley of death, and then they're on to the final stage, how do you marry that? How do you get them across that bridge?
I mean, I think it's a new model, but so I think you could do a couple of things. One is, they could sell, and they could, then move on to the profitable model and have for-profit shareholders. They could also, I don't think that they need to sell, meaning they could stay in and just continue to be a part of a company that's profitable. No?
It's two kinds of capital all landing in the same bucket. This really so when you're seeking philanthropy for the ultimate goal of for profit,
But
and then you now have both of these stakeholders, right?
Yeah, but the person who invests in that valley of death knows that they're investing in a company that
Do you
presumably
mean philanthropy
wants to
as in
be-
grants? You're seeking grants? Right, so you're saying if you're seeking grants, or you're saying about it, you're giving grants?
So we're donating to for-profit companies now debt, and we're trying to reconcile asking people to donate to something where ultimately somebody will profit from it. We still have struggled with that story.
Is that uncommon? I don't think so.
Yeah,
That's not uncommon.
you're giving grants to,
We invest in companies.
You invest in
value debt as a philanthropist. But
but you take,
getting our philanthropic capital is ultimately going to benefit somebody financially.
Do you get warrants?
do you
and-
get shares?
Do you get warrants or options?
Sort of like swaps and all kinds of things, but we're not really there to try and make money. So I'm asking the question, Because I'm looking for the answer.
I know, it would be good if you did get
Yeah,
some shares. So
exactly, yeah.
at ADDF, so Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation, they do venture philanthropy. So when they invest, so it's not necessarily a grant, they do get, warrants, or they could do, they invest like any other venture fund. It's just that the return expectation is very different. So, and then also when they do get a return, it's fed back into giving, the funds out. So
Created that model, it's just that when you ask people to give philanthropy, you can't set expectations of the next. We just struggle with that.
Well, I think we're gonna have to leave it on that. We're getting a hook here, but thank you. I just want to thank all the panelists and thank you, Doug, for putting up with
Thank you.
the tech.
thanks,
Sorry about
Marty.
the dog.
Thank you.